All right, that's great, because that's leading into my last topic, which I want to discuss, is how do we solve some basic equations? How good are you at doing that? And I'm going to add just a few cases of complexity onto our simple two-step, multi-step example. What if I had some variations to our simple sort of two-step, multi-step case? What if I had parentheses in my equation, or I had variables on both sides, or fractions or denominators in my equation? What if I had squares, square roots, or other functions involved? How do I go about solving these equations? It's just a first step before we get into our more complicated SHSAT math. How do I solve basic equations? You need to know this. So for example, if I had 2 times x minus 3 equals 10, what do? Well, this is pretty simple. If you have parentheses, distribute. 2 times x is 2x. Minus 3 times 2 is minus 6, and that equals 10. Then what do? I combine like terms if there are any. X's, x squareds. If I have 5x squared minus 2x squared, I can combine it to 5 minus 2x squared is 3x squared. It's kind of like 5 apples less 3 apples is 2 apples, that kind of idea. So if I'm down to a two-step, I do the same thing as I did before. I add 6 to both sides and divide by 2. Parentheses. Generally, we multiply out and simplify. Not always. Sometimes you need to factor or cancel right away, but that's a good rule of thumb. Variables on both sides. What does that look like? Well, what if I had 5x plus 10 equals 7x minus 30? I have variables here. I've got x here, x here. When I solve an equation, I want to isolate my variable on one side. So guess what? I'm going to subtract the 5x off of one side. That's how we usually get rid of the variables on one side. That cancels. I end up with 10 equals 7 minus 5 is 2x minus 30. I'll add 30 to both sides. 2x equals 40. X equals 20. That's how we deal with variables on both sides. Okay? What if I have denominators or fractions? Suppose I have not fractions I want to add or subtract. We did that already. But what if I just had, like, say, x plus 5 over x equals 10? What's the first thing I want to do? The very first thing, assuming I've already combined like terms and simplified as much as I could, I want to get rid of those denominators. They're bad, very, very bad, if you want to think about it. How do I do that? Well, the opposite of dividing, which is what a denominator is multiplying. Multiplied by the entire denominator. Here, my denominator is x, so I'm multiplying both sides by x. If that were more complicated, 3x squared minus 10x plus 5, well, guess what? I'd multiply both sides by 3x squared minus 10x plus 5. I want to get rid of the denominator, the entire denominator. So those cancel. Don't try to distribute. That's not going to help you. You did this so you could cancel out on the left side. X plus 5 equals 10 times x, 10x. Now I'm back to the case of variables on both sides. What do? I subtract the x's from both sides. And that will take me back to the case of a two-step equation. And then what do? I solve a two-step equation. So you can see how we're adding layers of complexity. You want to make sure you know how to undo certain complexities when you see them. What about simple squares or square roots? What if I had x squared minus 9 equals 7? Well, the first thing I want to do, if I have any function, whether it's square or square root, or could be trig function, absolute value function, whatever it is, I want to isolate that function just like I would isolate a variable. Okay? So in this case, I'm going to add 9 to both sides. X squared equals 16. Then I want to undo the function, which often means applying the inverse function if such exists. In the case of squares for positive x, it's taking the square root of both sides. So what does that mean? Remember, our square root of x squared, as we just discussed, it's not just x, it's absolute value of x. And that equals the square root of 16, which is always positive 4. Well, again, my answer is not just x equals 4, because absolute values, if you don't know already, we'll learn later, have a positive and negative case solution. So plus and minus 4 solve that equation. Think about it. minus 4 absolute value equals 4, or minus 4 squared is 16, and the square root of 16 is 4, which equals 4. The minus 4 solution for x works as well. So you have to keep that in mind. Sometimes we throw that out in geometry and other problems where you can't have a negative length and it really isn't meaningful to the problem. But you should know the mathematics of it. So again, simple squares and square roots, I want to isolate that square or square root first, and then undo the function, ideally with an inverse operation. Okay? This is how we solve some basic equations. If you know this and you're comfortable with this and these functions or these complications, you're pretty much in shape to get into SHSAT math.